Thank you so much, Stephen, for that kind welcome, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. And thank you to all of you for coming and joining us today, for today and tomorrow. This is a wonderful conference, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to share this conversation with you. As one word, because we've heightened security at the gate, as many of you probably experienced, we'll have people who are still coming through. Please feel free to make a seat for them and welcome them as they come through the midway through the panels. Let me start by thanking you gentlemen for joining me. This is obviously a historic time. John Kerry last night gave a toast where he said that we are living at a moment that probably all of us will remember for the rest of our lives if things go correctly. And both of you as CEOs are not only instrumental in what's going on at COP right now, but also instrumental in creating that change away from negotiating tables. Let me start with you, Paul, if you don't mind. Unilever has had quite a run recently. I'm going to quote a couple of stats. Let me know if I'm getting these wrong. Since 2008, your factories have been emitting 37% less emissions. Waste to landfills has gone down 85%. And revenues are up 22%. Mr. Leal, similarly, your company was born with the DNA of sustainability. You have used Brazil's forest and have been committed not only to reforestation in a corporate perspective, you stood for vice president of the country on a platform of sustainability. So let me ask both of you, and if you don't mind, I'll start with you, Paul. What precisely are you hoping to see at COP? What you are here, not as delegates from subnationals, but as CEOs. When you're talking to the delegates, when you're talking to government leaders, what specifically are you asking for? What is the definition of success and failure by Friday?
Yeah. Well, it's just building on what was said before, it's already very clear that we're not even talking about our children or their grandchildren. We're actually talking about what is happening today already. And what happens in Paris at the end of the day is a decision how many people are going to live or die. This is first and foremost a moral case that I think we all should rally to, irrespective of CEOs. If you live in Chennai right now, or even in the north of England, in Cumbria, etc., it's not good livings. And that is more or less a weekly occurrence right now. So I think the issue is there, and the science is overwhelming. People are aware of it. So what we expect from Paris now is that obviously now that the ministers are involved and the negotiators are gone, that common sense prevails, that we have at least an indication that there is a final target by a certain period of time that we decarbonize this economy. It's absolutely key that business sees that we're working towards an objective like that to unlock the trillions needed for financing. The second thing is that we agree on a mechanism to at least go back every 5 years, a ratcheting mechanism if it's called, to renegotiate, because what we now get from the INDCs, intended nationally determined commitments, is clearly not enough. It brings us to about 2.7 degrees. More people are talking now, very fortunately, about 1.5 degrees, which is where we are, which gets you to about 2 degrees by 2050. So you need this mechanism of renegotiating every 5 years. And then finally, it is important that we agree on financing. It is a relatively limited amount of money that the governments need to commit to, which seemed to be an issue and still is a contentious issue right now. But the 100 billion a year as of 2020 every year is the minimum. And what is important is actually it's not enough. It is a drop in the bucket for what is needed to transform our economies, but it will release these trillions of the private sector that we're really after. So carbon neutrality, 5-year mechanism, no backsliding obviously in that, and then a good financing mechanism will do a lot already.
I think we're done, right? We got all the the major issues.
If it was that easy.
If only the ministers.
Yes, if only.
Guilherme, let me ask you. Obviously, Brazil is one of the most important players at the table. It's one of the developing nations that has traditionally been a source of contention, the equity between developed and developing nations, and how we should allocate carbon amongst those. What do you hope to see by Friday? What is your definition of success and failure?
First of all, it's a great honor to be here alongside Bo. Thanks for the invitation. I think that the results of Paris COP21 are somehow already obtained, because it's so different from Copenhagen, when we were waiting from governments to build the solution. Now we have businesses, civil society, and governments, but much more conscious, much more aware that we will produce the change. Governments are fundamental to set a framework, to set a long-term goal, to set the conditions, the basic conditions to business make the work happens. It's fundamental, and we, as Paul said, we need clear signals that the low carbon economy it is the future if we want to survive as human beings, as a species. So we are waiting for these signals, very clear and sound signals, and we need but this perception of each of us, individuals, the civil society organizations, businesses, and government must work together to build this new economy. It's the key point for us. As you know, Brazil has been famous for its natural resource, and in the case of the forest, for instance, that is a key point. The use of land, it's a key point to reduce our emissions and keep temperature around 1.5–2 degrees. And we hope that the commitment to finance these movements and to establish the North are weighted to next Friday. But the most important for me is this kind of gathering in the increase of this perception that all of us together in a dynamics among different sectors will make the difference.
It's an interesting point that you raise, and I want to ask a little bit push on this, because one of the things that's interesting is both of your companies have done well by doing good so far. Revenues are up, your companies are healthy. I'm sure for many in the audience this is true, that they're working for governments or they're working for companies where we've seen, luckily, consumers and our hearts and ethics aligning. What happens a year from now, 2 years from now, if we see a dip in the economy, if we see Unilever's revenues go down and you have shareholders or you have employees, or you have employees since you're not quite as beholden to shareholders? Or what happens when revenues go down and you have third parties who are saying, I don't want to prioritize sustainability. I don't want to spend money on environmental and decarbonization issues. I'd rather see that in my own pocket. How do you apply?
Well, you are, in my opinion, mixing up two things. That it might well be that revenues go down because it depends on the market you're in, it depends on the strategy you have. It's actually the lowest factor that decides if your revenues go down or not is the sustainability part. What we are saying to people is if you're a long-term shareholder, and it really boils down to that, if you're a long-term shareholder, you want your company to be sustainable for the long term, the best strategy to achieve that is to have a sustainable strategy. And fortunately, we're being helped because we're getting to the point that the cost of not doing things is higher than the cost of doing things. Half of the Fortune 100 companies are already saving today over $1 trillion because of energy efficiency measures that they've taken. Increasingly, companies that are operating under the ESG principles see higher returns. Company that disclose their carbon footprint, put mitigating measures in place, reduce the risk for shareholders and will have a lower cost of capital and have a higher return. So many factors influence your business, and I'm sure we'll get some criticism from some people that when business results are under pressure to link that to sustainability. But frankly, we need to stay the course because that is the highest chance that we have to continue to have a healthy concern over the long term. Fortunately now the science is overwhelming. 97% of the scientists, and Johan Rockström has been a great engine in that, believe that we have a serious issue. That is also the case for the majority of our shareholders. In fact, if there's one endangered species, it's the climate change deniers. So I think we're getting overwhelming evidence, and also we are getting increasing evidence that in order to get growth and job creation, we need to take actions on climate mitigation. If we don't take the actions on climate mitigation, we will actually starve ourselves from growth and job creation. And that is now visible. We just had an investor conference as an interesting coincidence last week in Singapore with all of our major investors. And they're all different because no investor is the same, but explaining to them our strategy, obviously they like to see the results, but explaining to them our strategy on what we do in this regard is increasingly well understood. And I think we're at a tipping point when the financial market gets interested. We have $24 trillion of capital asking for a price on carbon. Just here this week, 800 billion of capital under management is actively decarbonizing their portfolio. So the evidence in this
but you must get some pushback. I mean, there must be some shareholders out there who say, look, fossil fuel is still less expensive in many places than renewables. The money that you spend on renewables in the short term is money that I don't get to put in my pocket as a dividend or as an increase in stock price. How do you make the argument to that?
Well, the business isn't stupid. We're not putting money in a bottomless pit. What we find now in Unilever is we've moved Europe to green energy. We're rapidly moving with the NRG company from David Crane, the US, to green energy. Many of our factories are operating under biomass. I just opened a factory in Tianjin on solar and wind, and actually the rates of return on these projects is a healthy 23%. I don't think there's any shareholder that if they take the time, forget the sell side analysts, you have to be careful, but if you look at any shareholder and you sit down reasonably well, you can explain that to them. We still have about 9% of coal in our value chain, where we have factories and where energy is delivered by coal, by external parties, that we're actively working to look at alternatives. But in the next, we've made our commitment to be carbon positive by 2030. We're now about 30-40% on our way. I think by 2030 we will be there, because the investments right now globally, even in non-fossil fuel, is for the first time higher. The job creation is higher in the green energy sector. So that, we are often talking to ourselves by challenging ourselves that tipping point isn't there. We see it. And we have to be mindful that we don't run ahead of the times, but the possibilities are increasingly well within reach and economically viable.
Guilherme, let me ask, you actually stood for office running for vice president of Brazil, speaking on a platform that touched much on sustainability. So you were actually making the pitch to the voters, and I believe you earned 20% of the vote of the nation. Yeah. How?
He should have been president.
Yeah, particularly with what's going on in Brazil now.
Think about it. Yeah, that's for sure.
How do you make the argument when you're talking to voters and you're making this argument, and clearly many of them were persuaded, but not all of them, that sustainability should be on par with more short-term gains in quality of life? How do you make that argument? What did you find worked and what didn't work in trying to persuade?
Charles, I'm very partial to talk about this, because we were an almost inviable company 40 years ago, and we have been building our business on those values, on those beliefs that we need to work together to build a better world. Trying to convince the voters, the Brazilian voters, we tried to show the opportunities that are behind the sustainability. I remember when I was with a journalist, and he asked me, how are you waiting to convince voters that now that they reach the medium income class, they have not the right to buy his new car? I said, we are not going to convince them. The traffic jam will. If everybody has the right to have his own car to the weekends and so on, but it's madness to be stuck for 4 hours or for 3 hours to go to work and to come back to home.
In Sao Paulo, 3 hours is like a short time.
In Sao Paulo. So the evidence are becoming so high that if we are leaders, we must be at the forefront of the change, of promoting change. But we are not going to promote change alone. I remember another episode when we went public, we became a public company in 2004, and I take part in a small part of the road show, and I was saying to our investors, we have 20 years of story with a lot of volatility in Brazil, and we have presented a very interesting growth rate. We are going to do more of the same, to invest in the future. If you don't like this kind of behavior, business behavior, please buy other shares than ours, because this is our most deep belief. And we, as Paul said, we cannot to be so far from the mainstream that we disconnected, but right. We cannot be lead by others. If you want to be leading companies, we need to adopt this kind of behavior.
And this is a great point, because I think both of your companies, you have both established yourself as leaders. Both of your companies have established yourself as leaders in spaces where change has been long and coming. But let's talk about your consumers for a moment, right? Because one of the biggest changes, Paul, I believe you guys did a study that showed that consumers are 70% of the impact of your products.
In our value chain.
In your value chain. Now, greenhouse gases, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, from customers using your products is actually up 4% since 2010. Water consumption is down just 2%. So you're committed to having your environmental impact by 2020, and yet most of the environmental impact from your products are things that you can't control. It's consumers who, as you grow, consume more and more. And countries like Brazil, countries like China enjoy consuming more and more. This is the benefits of reaching the middle class. How do you impact that?
Yeah, so what is unusual perhaps in our philosophy is that we take, I always say, co-responsibility of the total value chain. We move well beyond CSR. If you look at our own carbon footprint since 1995, we have had about a 75% reduction. We will be carbon neutral, as I said, in 2030. So in our own value chain, we are fine. What we are looking at really is taking responsibility of the total value chain. So if you're in the food business like us, from farm to fork. So that's why it's so important that we get transformative changes well beyond what the consumer individually can handle. For example, deforestation is 16% of global warming. So we have to be actively involved in ensuring that all the materials we buy, the soy, the beef, the palm, the paper, the pulp, that comes from non-deforested sourcing. And we've created industry coalitions to do that. The consumer alone cannot make that choice, but we have the size and scale to transform. We need to move to climate smart agriculture. We need to attack the issues of food waste. 30–40% of the world's food gets wasted. If it was a country, by the way, it would be the third biggest emitter after China and the US. So we work in our value chain to attack these targets, which will have a much bigger impact than we can do in our own operations. With the consumer, it's a little bit more difficult, because the consumer's biggest carbon footprint is actually in how long they shower. Americans in your country, you've decided to all shower 12 minutes, the Brits shower 8 minutes, Europeans 6 minutes, but it's incredibly difficult to change that. I have 3 children and it looks like it's on average 30 minutes. You have to turn off the tap to get them out of that. So we are not going to change that. That is a little bit naive to think that. So what you need to do is to be sure that green energy comes to the grid, that it is sustainable. So again, you need to do market transformative changes. And that's why it's so important that if we really want to get to this 1.5 degree target, that we all work together at a different level than we've done alone. Because we as a company also say very clearly, these are the objectives and the goals we aspire to get to, but we cannot do that alone. And that's why it's important that the people that are now in the blue zone in Le Bourget understand that with this partnership that we are advocating, we can go 10 times faster. There were 150 heads of state here, more than any time, anywhere in the world, a higher concentration of heads of state we've never seen. But the same is true for the private sector. With the We Mean Business, with the NASCA side on caring for climate, with the UN Global Compact, or the low carbon technology partnerships with the World Business Council, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses putting these coalitions in place, coalitions to drive it to a better world. Just one very quick example of that is very practical. is all the freezers and ice cream cabinets, beverages cabinets. They used HFC or CFC. It's about 2 or 3% of global warming. The whole industry, so the consumer can't do anything about that. If you buy an ice cream, you can't really influence what the freezing unit is in the cabinet itself. But the whole industry decided to move to natural refrigerants. So obviously that takes 10 years because you're not going to scrap all these cabinets. Your shareholders wouldn't be happy, but frankly we wouldn't be happy either. That's totally irresponsible. So you phase it in over a 10-year period of time. We're about 60% on the way. We've done that at a total industry level with the Cokes, the Pepsis, the Nestle's, the Unilevers, because it's non-competitive and it's better for all of us.
But let me push on, a little bit on this consumer issue. Unilever is huge in India, right? It's one of your strongest markets. It's historically. Unilever has had public health campaigns in the past, particularly hand washing in India, that has changed behavior across millions of people. What should not only Unilever but other companies be doing targeted at consumers? Because you've spoken very eloquently about what CEOs should be doing and companies should be doing. But really, the root of this is changing consumer behavior, right?
And a lot of that is happening, by the way. If you look in the US in food, for example, 80% of the growth of the food market now is coming from products that you would call bio or organic or green. That market is changing 100,000 miles an hour. Fair trade is one of the fastest growing things that is happening. So you need to help consumers. Our laundry detergents, we're the biggest producer of laundry detergents in all these emerging markets. It's all, the technology is allowing us to do that now in cold water and get the same temperatures of what used to be 60 or 90 degrees. We've brought deodorants on the market which have a 30 or 40% lower, the spray cans, lower carbon footprint.
That's
so
interesting.
technology is going to drive that more. You cannot ask the consumer themselves really to have a significant impact by changing their habits other than on the macro picture by getting them connected to mini grids that are green, and that's why governments need to help. And some governments decided to backtrack from that is actually a tragedy because we can get very close to providing many of the homes, certainly in the developed world, with green energy. And that's really the main source of carbon if we just stay in the carbon discussions.
Right.
But consumers do care. See, any of the research you see out there, obviously consumers want a product they can afford. Obviously the product needs to taste good or perform. But if you run your research, that will always be the driver. But then nobody wants to buy a product that pollutes more. Nobody wants to buy a product where there is slavery in the value chain. Nobody wants to buy a product that creates more unemployment. People genuinely will look at products that provide a positive contribution. And in this age of transparency with the internet, the biggest number of searches that we have, which we can all monitor now, is not about the price or the quality of our product, but is on how we behave in our value chain.
That's very interesting.
And what you see in the world is people vote with their feet. You look at Tesla's market cap versus General Motors, where you have 800,000 cars or whatever they have now versus 9 million cars. They have half the market cap. People are starting to vote with their feet on the things that are happening.
And let's let the audience vote with their feet a little bit. Let's take some questions. We actually, as was mentioned, if you have a question, we're going to take some questions from the audience, but also feel free to email your question to q@nytimes.com. And we have some folks here. Sophie, why don't you... If we could
I have one question. As business leader, what can you most effectively do to convince fellow business leaders that energy is in fact every company's business?
Guilherme?
I didn't.
As a
What you
business
can do
leader,
as
what
fellow-
can you do to convince other business leaders?
Oh. First of all, trying to demonstrate that it's good for business adopt those values, adopt those commitments. And we are members of a group, Paul and I, of business leaders that are trying to convince the B team, that is trying to convince the large community of business leaders that a plan B must be created. We are not viable in the way we define success in capitalism. Just to accumulate assets, it's not our target. I really deeply believe that companies can and should be agents of change. We have power, we have network, we have cash, we have influence, we have a lot of things that, as I said, together with civil society, together with governments, we need and we can promote the change necessary to face our challenges. I think, going back to your question, Charles, about the consumers, that products are not only things to fulfill functional needs. Products and services can be cultural vehicles. We need technology for sure. We are talking about energy and the new technologies that will promote the change of the pattern of energy. But I really believe that the change of behavior is a key point to build this new, inclusive and sustainable world. And companies, when designing their products and services, can be innovative in sharing this new behavior that we expect to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. There's a mic runner right here. Oh yes, sir, go ahead.
Yes, hello. Isn't changing consumers as easy as...
Wait.
Isn't changing consumers' behavior as easy as creating a label for zero footprint products, like a green foot or something? I mean, the same thing has happened for, organic things in Europe.
Yeah, you need to create global standards, and there are no global standards, which makes it difficult. And the consumer is not one consumer. Some might be worried about animal testing. Some might be worried about packaging. Some might be worried about your water footprint. Some might be worried about your social compliance in your value chain. So increasingly, I think the responsible industries are using their QR codes on their packaging to allow people, which is the beauty of the internet, to get far more information and to see which is the type of data that influences their purchase decision. But it's not that easy. If you would put everything with legislation on a package, first of all, you have the issue of standards, and secondly, you probably wouldn't have any space anymore to put your brand name on there in the first place. So we have to find other ways to communicate. Unfortunately, the millennials, which is obviously the consumers of the future that you need to be sure that you keep into your business, which become an increasingly bigger group, they are very well aware of it. They are looking for businesses with purpose, increasingly so. Also in their own behaviors, their purchase choices, where they want to work, companies they reward with their employment, etc. These people are going to change the way business is being done in an accelerated way. We're living in the age of transparency. That's why we actually are moving not only just to sustainable sourcing, but we're moving very rapidly to source certified. I think at the end of the day, we are not far from now, we'll have a little machine. We still call it telephone. I don't know why, because it's only probably 5% of the time we use it for a telephone. But you'll hang it above your food and you can see how many calories it is or where it comes from. People want to really know when the meat they eat from, if it comes from Farmer Joe or Farmer Jill. And the same will be true for all the other materials. So in palm oil, for example, we've now in Indonesia mapped about 1,800 mills. We've set up our own fractionation unit, working with smallholder farmers, obviously sustainable farming, so that we get value chains that are transparent. And in Brazil, where we have tomatoes, or in Latin America, we're the biggest buyers globally of tomatoes, we put cameras on the farms even, so people can see what is happening there. You have an opportunity to interact with the farmers itself. So that sort of thing, I think, is going to be the future. People will be very conscious in their choices, and certainly when it comes to food, that they know what their value chain is.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Please help me thank our guests for this fantastic and informative panel.